Hello there guys, what is going on? Son of Chelsea back here again for another video, and today I'm going to be reflecting on Antonio Conte's time at Chelsea. But before we get into any of that, I want to ask you guys, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also hit that like button if you're enjoying the content, because it helps out the videos and the channel as well. But Antonio Conte, the reason I wanted to talk about Conte, I was thinking about making a Conte sort of versus Sarri video. But then on Tuesday, when we had the 3-year anniversary of Chelsea winning the Premier League title in 2017 under Conte, that West Brom game with Michy Batshuayi's winner, I sort of just wanted to make a video about Conte because he is a very interesting character to talk about. And I think in reflection, 3 years later, looking back at his time, not only looking at his first season, but his second season, because I think if you're supportive of Conte, you sort of maybe want to dismiss that second season and not reflect on it at all. And I can understand why it wasn't a very enjoyable season, that 17-18. But personally, for me, what I'm going to get at this video is I think for me, Conte, it has to be a 50-50 split. I think for a number of reasons. I think the first season, as good as it was absolutely incredible. So I don't want to underestimate that. This is not me trying to demean Conte. He won a Premier League title. That is absolutely incredible. And the way he did it, as we'll get into, was record-breaking. It was incredible to watch and witness, and some of my best memories going to Chelsea will always be contained within that season. And that was down to Conte, down to his tactics, down to his coaching, down to the leadership he brought to Chelsea that year. But in 17-18, it was the complete polar opposite. And unfortunately, I think there are some things that happened in that season that Chelsea is still suffering from now. And I think there was a lot of negative things that happened that I think Chelsea need to learn from and not make mistakes going forward. So let's start with 16-17. It was very unpredictable to know after that 15-16 season what Chelsea were going to be like. After finishing 10th, the fear of losing Eden Hazard, Diego Costa, some of the big players, what would Chelsea look like and how quickly could Chelsea get back to competing for the Premier League title, which they lost in 2016. That summer, we brought in N'Golo Kante, which was an absolutely astonishing signing, considering what he'd done for Leicester. Leicester now being in the Champions League as well. To get that player, I remember Gary Lineker tweeting at the time that he thought this would make Chelsea big contenders for the Premier League title. As well, we got Michy Batshuayi, a new striker. That was interesting to see. A young striker. We didn't really know how he would fit in, especially competing with Diego Costa. Would Antonio Conte use two strikers up front and have Costa and Michy as a striker partnership? Marcos Alonso was signed quite late on in the window as a new left back. We didn't really know much about Marcos Alonso. We knew he played at Sunderland and Bolton before, so there was a bit of sort of doubt over him. And David Luiz returning to the club. How would he fit in at Chelsea's defence? Could he be trusted as a central defender for Chelsea? But a character that was missed at Chelsea, so it was nice to see him come back. But of course, we know the infamous Arsenal game, that defeat 3-0, really changed everything. Conte had pretty much been using the same formation, a 4-3-3. In some cases, it was a 4-2-4, but it was mostly 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1, sort of the formation Chelsea had been using for about 3 or 4 seasons, and was pretty much the set formation in the Premier League. Most teams were using that formation, and there was a sense it was getting stale in the previous season, so there was hope from some fans, including myself, that we could see a new formation. And this was one that Conte reverted to at half-time, switching from a 4 at the back to 3 at the back to 3-4-3, which then became the formation for the rest of the season. And in my time supporting Chelsea, one of the best tactical switches I've ever seen. Probably the most transformative effect I've seen in terms of changing from a formation, and performances just skyrocketed from there. I will never forget that whole lineup when it got announced a week later of players, and just understanding where everyone was going to fit in. Victor Moses at right wing back, Marcos Alonso at left wing back, David Luiz in the middle of a back three. And then that was the formation. That was the team. You could read it out yourself. And then we got some incredible wins on that 13-game winning run, which none of us saw coming. And just some of the high points of that. The 4-0 against Man United, absolutely astonishing. The 5-0 against Everton is one of the best performances I've ever seen from a Chelsea team. I think it goes up there with, you can go back to the 04-05 team under Mourinho. You can maybe go to recent teams as well. That was one of the best attacking performances I have ever seen from any team, not just Chelsea. And it was astonishing to witness that night. and as well Manchester City away. And I was at Man City that game. That was the 8th win in a row. I think a lot of us then realised this team can actually win the Premier League. This is a serious title challenge. And the way Conte rejuvenised some of our biggest players, Eden Hazard becoming a focal point once again, Diego Costa returning to his form of 14-15, the cult hero, the amazing striker, the talismanic figure that scored us so many goals. And I think once again proving why he was one of the best Chelsea strikers we've ever had, especially in the modern era. I think that season as well, along with the other title win in 14-15, I think proved how good Costa was. And Pedro, you know, after a difficult first season, this was really the season Pedro reached the heights at Chelsea. And the revelations in there as well of Marcos Alonso, Victor Moses and David Luiz, which really changed that formation as well. All players who had outstanding seasons. That league win at West Brom, I think in terms of actual title winning games, is right up there. You know, that Michy Batshuayi winner. It felt so ironic that Batshuayi, who'd been sidelined for the majority of the season, he was never getting in front of Diego Costa. But to come off the bench that night and score the winner, it was an amazing moment and an amazing celebration. And I think from there, you sort of hoped that Conte, with the connection he had to the Chelsea fans, I think that's what is the hardest thing to take about how it unfolded in the second season, was how strong that connection was between fans and the coach, I think. And that's something Conte reflected on earlier in the week in an interview with Sky Sports. That's what made a lot of Chelsea fans hope that this could be not just a 1 or 2 year thing. This can actually go on for a number of years, and hopefully we can build something quite special. But then we had the 2017 summer window, which I think has to go down for a number of years as the most disastrous transfer window in Chelsea's history. You know, I think you have to go back to try and find one as bad as this in terms of business, in terms of how it worked out. I mean, I just looked at it, and of course we go through the signings. But firstly, Diego Costa leaving Chelsea, him going AWOL. And I think this is one of the things that I think is one of the biggest mistakes. I think out of all the signings that happened that summer, and maybe some players we let go that we should have maybe kept, this is the one piece of business that I think really turned a lot of people's opinions on Conte, especially in retrospect. When we look back, losing Costa was absolutely massive for Chelsea, a player that had been the focal point of Chelsea's attack, a player you could rely on physically, mentally, to go out there and put in big performances. And once we lost that, and once Conte sending a text message, now I'm not going to, even though I'm a massive fan of Diego Costa, he's one of my favourite players ever to play for Chelsea, I'm not going to dismiss his actions within this, but I think Conte sending that text, allowing Costa to make himself out as the victim, was a really bad start to the summer and a really demoralising start to the summer, where we're going to be losing one of our best players and we needed to replace him. And the hunt went on for a new striker, and of course it was Alvaro Morata. Along with Morata, we got in Bakayoko, Zappacosta, Drinkwater and Caballero. Zappacosta and Drinkwater were basically panic buyers on transfer deadline day when we couldn't get Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain and we couldn't get another midfielder. And what's interesting, you've probably noticed I've missed out one signing that summer, because the one signing I missed out, Antonio Rudiger, is the only member of that group still in the first team the last time Chelsea played. And Rudiger is still a starter, and really, out of all the players, I think is the best signing, and the only signing you can sort of say from that window that was a success for Chelsea was Antonio Rudiger. But the conflict with the board really was the key thing that led to Conte's downfall at Chelsea. And the truth is, it really didn't get that awful until post-Christmas, because on New Year's Eve, Chelsea was second to Man City. We were very much in contention for the Champions League. It looked like, yeah, the title's probably out of our reach, but Chelsea can still end this season respectably. But from there really was where it got terrible. The defeats to Bournemouth and Watford were both terrible in their own right. And I think a year later, when Sarri had the defeats to Bournemouth and City, I think there was a lot of people trying to spin it as these were anomaly defeats. If you go back 12 months earlier and look at Conte's defeats during that time, I would argue they're actually worse. I think that some of the defeats and the level of the defeats and the consistency of defeats that Conte had during this period, the lack of wins was astonishing. I remember going back and looking at the stats. It was relegation form, it truly was, and Chelsea went quickly from second down to fifth and were battling for Champions League qualification, which really was something you wouldn't have expected at the start of the season. Man City away was the worst performance I've ever seen from a Chelsea team, and I think I still stand by that. You know, even the 6-0 a year later, the lack of desire that day was embarrassing to witness, and it was pretty clear that day. I think it just summarised how bad and toxic things had got under Conte. that it just summarised Chelsea weren't out there to compete with Man City. It basically became a training session, a procession for Man City to win those points. We weren't intending to attack that day. Conte, if you remember, during the January transfer window, had begged the board for a new striker. We got Olivier Giroud to back up Morata, who was struggling at this point. And he went up to Man City and put both Giroud and Morata on the bench and put a false nine in Eden Hazard and tried to play long ball up to Eden Hazard. And I think just the demeanour of Conte on the sidelines was once again another sign of how bad things had got, completely transformed with the energetic and lovable figure we'd seen diving into the fans against Arsenal at home the previous year. It was a changed man. Chelsea just didn't look the same team. We didn't look to have the same fight, hunger and desire. And the end was pretty much near. And I think Spurs at home, Spurs breaking their record at Stamford Bridge, I think was another moment. And I think at this point Conte was, refusing to make subs until like the 80th minute. You could just tell his heart wasn't into it. And the fact that conflict within the board was now conflicting with his professional sort of decision making on the pitch was unbearable, and it got to a point where you think you can't have a manager that's doing that, that's jeopardizing games at this point. And whether Conte was or not, I think it's undeniable what was happening during that period of time. By the time we got to the final day of the Premier League season away to Newcastle, losing that 3-0 as well in a nothing game really, where Newcastle had nothing to play for. Chelsea could still theoretically get Champions League football. Losing that game 3-0 as well was a terrible defeat, and I think just pretty much summarised how poor that second half of the season was and resigned Chelsea to Europa League football the following season. The weird thing was it did end with an FA Cup win. I think that's an easy thing to forget. That was a brilliant day, beating Man United, beating Jose Mourinho, winning another piece of silverware. The fact that Conte went out on a high, winning his first domestic trophy rather than a Premier League title, he'd never done it before, was a real high point and a good way to go out, a nice way to savour his final time at Chelsea. But I think in reflection, losing Champions League qualification and the way that season ended, I think was just, it sounds very strong but unforgivable. I think it could have gone so much better, and I think there was a lot in Conte's power that I think the excuse of just the transfer window and the lack of investment I don't think is good, because it wasn't even a lack of investment. Chelsea did spend a lot, we just didn't spend a lot on the right players and the targets apparently Conte wanted, and I don't think that's enough of an excuse for me when people make it in defence of Conte for the way he acted in that 2017-18 season, especially the second half of the season. I think moving on from there, of course Conte had this long drawn out battle legally with Chelsea that's only recently come to a conclusion. Chelsea eventually, I think, it cost the club about 26 million for Conte to leave Chelsea. And I think the lesson from Conte was knowing the figure you're bringing into Chelsea and, if it's going to last that long. There was a combustible element to Antonio Conte, as good as he was in that first season. And I think we saw a similar mistake Chelsea made with appointing Maurizio Sarri, even though I was in favour of Sarri and wanted to see him stay. Another situation where, did Chelsea really look at the profile of a manager, understanding what type of character he was, understanding what he demanded of the Chelsea board? Now, before I end the video, I just don't want to end it on a sour note, because I don't want people who are fans of Conte, like I was, I was very supportive of Conte and wanted to see him do well, and was very upset with the way it ended, to make you think that I'm just demeaning everything he did. That 16-17 season was astonishing. It was brilliant. It was one of the best experiences for, I think, many Chelsea fans, especially after the lows of 15-16. But I think when we're discussing Conte in history books of Chelsea, I think you have to take into consideration what happened in 17-18 and the negative effects of it. I think in general, I think it still has to be a positive of Antonio Conte, because he brought a Premier League title to Chelsea. That cannot be underestimated. Even with all the silverware Chelsea have won, you win a Premier League title, you're going to be considered as one of the best Chelsea managers, pretty simply. And the way he done it, 30 wins for the first time for Chelsea in a Premier League season, that 13-game winning run, which was astonishing. Some of the football that was played that season is still some of the best that have been played in Chelsea's history. So we can't underestimate that. But I just want to give my opinions today, and now I pass it over to you guys on Antonio Conte. Please let me know your opinions on him, his time at Chelsea, the positives and negatives that I've discussed in the comments below. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you did enjoy it, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Follow me on Twitter @SonOfChelsea, and I'll see you again.